What is objectivism? It's one of the most Googled philosophy questions out there. So today we're gonna tackle it. In this video, I'm gonna answer the question by first explaining what philosophy is, then explaining objectivism as a philosophy, and then finally explaining why people have such radically different views about it. As always, let's begin with a definition. Philosophy is a study of fundamental questions, which includes questions about reality, existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. So when we ask what is objectivism, what we really mean to ask is how does objectivism go about answering these fundamental questions? And to answer that, we need to look at the major schools of thought in philosophy, which are realism, idealism, and pragmatism. Let's start with realism. Realism is the view that our knowledge is derived from things in the world around us, things that exist independently of our thoughts and perceptions. Realists often speak of these external things as objective. That is because they exist whether or not anyone is around to perceive them. They are objective facts or objective reality. The primary example of a realist is Aristotle, who said all knowledge comes from experience. We learn about the world through our senses. We observe the world around us and come to conclusions based on those observations. This approach is called empiricism. Empiricists also say that all human knowledge originates from experience. Aristotle was an empiricist along with many other philosophers like Locke, Hume, and Russell. Now, where does objectivism fit in here? Well, objectivism is a form of realism. If you think about it, the word objective means existing outside of the mind. Something that exists outside of the mind is an objective fact. Something that exists only inside the mind is a subjective opinion. So the difference between realism and objectivism is the difference between a general category and a specific example of that category. Realism is a general philosophy of knowledge. Objectivism is a specific type of realism. More specifically, objectivism is a form of ethical realism. That is, objectivists believe that there are objective moral facts just as there are objective physical facts. But why do they believe this? Why do they think that there are objective moral facts? Well, because they think that morals are discoverable through reason. Morals aren't just opinions, they can be discovered just like scientific laws. This is similar to how realists view knowledge. Just as realists argue that knowledge is discovered through the empirical method, objectivists argue that moral knowledge is discovered through the rational method. So basically, objectivism is a particular way of answering certain kinds of philosophical questions. And that way is through reason. This is why objectivism is called rationalism, because its method is reason. Rationalists believe that the source of knowledge is the mind and that sense experience isn't necessarily reliable. In fact, rationalists reject empiricism completely. Rationalists include Plato, Descartes, and Spinoza. But of course, the main proponent of objectivism and therefore rationalism was Ayn Rand. And what did she have to say about it? Well, if you read her fiction or nonfiction, you'll see that Rand bases her philosophy of rationalism on three major pillars: reason, consciousness, and the individual. Let's take a closer look at each of these. First is reason. Rand says that reality is knowable and that the proper method for gaining knowledge is reason. Rand writes, reason is the only faculty which knows no hunger, thirst, or fatigue. It can go on functioning indefinitely without rest or sustenance. Man's capacity to think is unlimited, so for Rand, reason is the ultimate authority. And what does reason tell us about the nature of reality? Well, that reality is made up of two categories, matter and consciousness. Everything that exists is either a thing or a mind. Everything is made of material particles and minds thinking about those particles. Matter exists independently of any observer. It's objective reality. Minds depend on their environment. How do we know this? Because if there were no matter, there couldn't be minds. Since minds require matter to think about, matter is necessary for minds. So minds are dependent on matter, therefore, the material world is more fundamental than the mental world. The third pillar of Rand's philosophy is the individual. Rand argued that the individual is the basic unit of reality. Everything else is derivative from the individual. Society is made of individuals, culture is made of individuals, and politics is made of individuals. To paraphrase Rand, you can't have society without individuals. You can't have culture without individuals. And you can't have politics without individuals. So now we have a basic definition of objectivism. Now we need to explain why people have such radically different views about it. What makes some people consider objectivism a philosophy while others call it nonsense? Well, part of the confusion stems from the fact that most people don't understand what philosophy is. Remember, philosophy is a study of fundamental questions. So when someone asks what objectivism is, they really want to know how objectivists answer the fundamental questions of reality, existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. But most people don't realize this. Most people think that when you ask what something is, you're asking for a definition, but that's not quite right. There are different ways to define things, but when you're dealing with something as broad as a philosophy, asking what it is actually an invitation to explain how the philosophy answers fundamental questions, especially the question of knowledge. Like I said, realism, idealism, and pragmatism are three major schools of thought in philosophy, and objectivism is a subset of realism. So when someone asks what objectivism is, they should really be asking how does objectivism acquire knowledge? Or more plainly, how do objectivists know what they claim to know? Unfortunately, most people don't phrase it that way. So most philosophers don't respond that way. Most people simply get frustrated and respond with another definition. So this is part of the confusion surrounding objectivism. People don't really know what they're asking when they ask what objectivism is. Another part of the confusion is the fact that people hear the word objective and think it means scientific. They think that objectivism is a scientific theory rather than a philosophy, and this confusion is totally understandable. After all, Ayn Rand wrote science fiction. She didn't write purely philosophical works. So most people think that objectivism is a theory like evolution or gravity. But remember, objectivism is a philosophy, not a scientific theory. Philosophers ask different questions than scientists. Scientists ask, how does the universe work? Philosophers ask, how does the universe make sense? The point is that both science and philosophy are trying to answer different kinds of questions. Science is trying to answer factual questions, whereas philosophy is trying to answer conceptual questions. A third reason that people get confused about objectivism is because they think that Rand meant for objectivism to be a political program. Again, this is understandable. Rand wrote political novels and essays. So people think that Rand wanted objectivism to be used as a political program. But remember, objectivism is a philosophy, not a political program. Of course, a philosophy can inspire a political movement, just like any other kind of idea can. For example, Marxism is a political philosophy. Karl Marx offered critiques of capitalism and suggested alternatives to capitalism. Marxism is a political philosophy, but it's also the basis of many political movements. Similarly, objectivism is a philosophy, but it's also the basis of a political movement. However, the mistake is thinking that objectivism is the political movement. In fact, objectivism is the philosophy behind a political movement. Finally, the fourth reason that people get confused about objectivism is because they think that Rand created objectivism. But again, this is a misunderstanding. Rand did indeed popularize objectivism, but she didn't invent it. Objectivism was already well established long before Rand came along. Rand credited three philosophers with founding the philosophy: Aristotle, Descartes, and Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle founded the philosophy's empirical realism. Descartes founded the philosophy's rationalism, and Aquinas founded the philosophy's ethics. So the point is that objectivism has deep roots. Rand merely rediscovered the philosophy and adapted it to modern times. Rand even wrote an essay on the history of objectivism. So if you want to know what objectivism really is, you should probably start there. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button and consider making a donation. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an upload. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.